Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Since the time allotted by the organizers to extend the coffee break has expired, I suggest that we should begin this panel about the economic relations between Russia and China. And since all of the panelists are here, so we are in full quorum, so I believe that we are ready to begin. So, dear colleagues, I think that to start off, just first about the timing, there will be a few words which I will offer for an introduction, and then we'll have colleagues seated here, and each of us will be given approximately 7-8 minutes, and we will do our best in order to leave some time towards the end for your questions. I don't think that we can afford any questions in the course of the discussion, so please accept my apologies for this. And further on, in terms of the amount of time left, please prepare your questions. There definitely will be a few ones that we will listen to. If there is a debate in the course of the discussions, we will be only happy, but I'm afraid that in terms of the discussions, these discussions will be only between the panelists themselves. So this is a bit of a lead-on to the main subject topic. I believe a very curious moment that is evolving, in between Russia and China in our relations. Up to recent times, we have had a very dynamic statistics in the bilateral trade, in a very agile and good-looking way, but unfortunately for some time now, the events of 2014 and 15, the share of the China in the Russian trade didn't grow. In between 13 and 14, it really didn't change, or maybe in between 2012 and 2013, it doesn't matter, then it grew up by about 0.5%, basically. And after that, in Russia, there happened what happened, and in absolute terms, the mutual trade started going down. In relative terms, China has somewhat grown its share in this case, and much better than the rest of Russia's trading partners. But nevertheless, in the recent years, it was not possible to say that the area, which I suppose was the main segment in our bilateral interaction, was pushing our relations forward. Moreover, principally speaking, the trade exchange has been going a very narrow path. Not everybody was content with it because Russia was primarily supplying resources, recently receiving manufactured products from China, while always having the intention to develop something in its own manufacturing industry. And so I believe this particular point predetermined very close trading cooperation between us, but also poses a bit of a challenge. For example, look at the service sector. We don't have any big progress in trading services and goods. Goods maybe, but not services. Take a look at the capital market. Yes, Russia is going through the period of high rates, and Russia requires investments. But do Chinese investments grow into Russia? Well, obviously, based on the data from the central bank, they have shrunk, like with other countries. For example, China invests much more into Kazakhstan, both in the current volumes. For example, considering the results of 2015, it's not, but whatever. Before 2014, the aggregate amount of investment in Kazakhstan from China is greater. So what deters us from moving towards a much higher and closer cooperation? Why? In politics, there are so pleasant and comfortable announcements that we hear, which practically do not translate themselves upon the level of interaction beyond trading in goods, in terms of the narrow specialties that we have identified for ourselves in this mutual trade. Maybe it is because the political union that has strengthened lately is being built not upon the positive topic, but maybe not so positive ones. Firstly, and this is a very important thing to understand, because one should definitely reflect upon the commonality of approaches between the leaders of two countries, a certain level of concentration of power, personal power. I believe that in Russia, since the times of the Gorbachev perestroika, there hasn't been so much personal power in any individual leader, like in the case of Russian leader. In China, since the time of Deng Xiaoping, there wasn't so much power concentrated in the hands of the one person. Doesn't this particular aspect makes us look akin? And another important thing that we hear very well in the statements by the leaders of the countries, them not being ready to accept social instabilities. Isn't this an element of unification? Isn't this kind of a friendship which was the friendship against a third one? Maybe the problem is that the political agenda, which produced so many good statements and mutual meetings and declarations. It is not being translated further because this is an unconstructive political agenda. It is not pro, but rather a contra something, and that in this case it is not being translated into the creation of a new basis for the new economic cooperation, but essentially, the previous basis, like in our few previous trade, we've already exhausted. Is that true or not? And I hope that our panelists and speakers following me will try and dispel my, I would say, provocative thinking. And I would be very happy if we end up having a discussion so that by the end of it you will have a clear understanding of the strong and weak points in our cooperation and the understanding of the future, which would be more real than what we hear in official statements. I believe this could be a very valuable outcome of this panel, and so I hope that we will try and give you an opportunity to arrive at such conclusions. Now let me pass the microphone to Mikhail Margelov, who is the Vice President of the Transneft company, as well as the Vice President of the Russian International Affairs Council. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Today I would like, again, just to start this discussion, a few words about one of the central aspects of the current Russian-Chinese economic cooperation, specifically in as far as the expansion of the pipeline system, the East Siberia and the Pacific coast is concerned. Our bilateral relations today are based upon the principles of mutual respect, benefit, and the intention to take into account each other's interest when undertaking large-scale projects, like both in economics and other areas. And so the energy cooperation to us is one of the cornerstones of this cooperation. And we're moving on. Yeah, yes, you're trying to switch it on somehow. Yeah, right, oh, thank you. So, here you can clearly see, before moving over to the central topic of my presentation, I would like to say a few words about the work done by our company. Here up on the slide you can see the system of trunk oil pipelines and refined product pipelines of Transneft company were main indicators of the operation by our company last year. You can note that it's a large-scale network, very diverse network, and particular attention currently we're paying to the development of the eastward destination for our shipments through. And here you can see this eastward route to the system of East Siberia, the Pacific Ocean. Essentially, we're turning our company into the company which connects two parts of the world, Europe and Asia. And now, as to the system of trunk pipelines, the company annually transports up to 90% of oil produced in Russia, and this applies both to the domestic refineries as well as exports. For the refined product, this particular indicator equals approximately 25%. Apart from a particular attention we are paying to the transportation of oil by foreign countries. This is the raw materials which we transport from Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan and Turkmenia. Altogether, last year, the system accepted about 485.5 million tons of oil. One of the most ambitious projects by Transneft could definitely be considered the project East Siberia, the Pacific Ocean. The length of the pipeline is approximately 4,800 kilometers. Proudly, I can say that the record time frame for the construction of this particular project was achieved under extremely harsh climatic conditions with a very strict compliance with the environmental legislation. And this particular slide shows the map which vividly demonstrates that the execution of the East Siberian pipeline project was done in two stages. The start of the construction, the symbolic first welding of the two pipes of the section in this pipeline, was done almost 10 years ago on April 28, 2006 in the city of Tayshet in the Irkutsk region, in accordance with the governmental decree on the execution of the East Siberia Pacific project. And what's important is that on December 29, 2009, which was about less than 3.5 years after that, the first phase of the construction was completed, and the length of the route from the Had bus station to Skvorodino amounted to 2,694 kilometers, while the capacity of the throughput was 30 million tons. Very impressive scales and very impressive capacity. Simultaneously, we had the construction of a special Cosmino sea terminal. Once the first phase was completed, we were able to export 15 million tons of oil a year through Cosmino port. Oil from Skvorodino to Cosmino port at this first stage of the construction was being shipped by cisterns, railroad cisterns. The first tanker with the SPO oil was shipped on December 29, 2009, which can truly be considered the starting point from which new era for the development of the oil industry in Russia began. Since January 1st, the export of Russian oil into China started along the Skvorodino-Mahe pipeline. The Rosneft company started shipping 15 million tons of oil a year. The second stage of the construction of SPO completed on December 25, 2015, including into itself the construction of the oil pipeline in the section Skvorodino to Cosmino with a capacity of 30 million tons. Let's go back, I believe. With a capacity of 30 million tons, throughput with a length in excess of 2,000 kilometers, 2,046,000 kilometers, the expansion of the Taichet-Skvorodino pipeline section to 50 million ton capacity throughput. And so now, from Taichet, oil to Cosmino port was being transported through pipelines. And I believe that it is important to note here that the East Siberian Pacific Ocean pipeline is essentially a unique one, not only from the point of view of the scale of it and the timing of its construction, but also from the point of view of the significance that it bears for developing long-term and mutually beneficial relations with partners. Now, a couple of words about the resource base for the SPO pipeline, essentially in terms of where the oil flows into this pipeline. What are the main centers of oil production and the investment projects currently worked on? Here, specifically, upon this slide, you can see what comes from where. It is obvious that the most important issue when making a decision to build the pipeline infrastructure is its future sources, otherwise why you should build it. So SPO pipeline system is being filled from the oil, with the oil from the western, eastern and East Siberian fields. The main hubs you can see up on this slide and have very exotic names. I wouldn't even try to pronounce them for you. In order to ensure the filling of the SPO capacity pipelines, our company is running various projects, pipelines from the biggest Siberian fields to the trunk pipeline, which is the East Siberia Pacific Ocean. The most important resource base is related with Zaporizhzhia-Purpe pipeline with the extension of 4,088 kilometers with the possibility to be expanded up to 45 million tons a year. This project is almost complete, and so there is a staged completion of the sections with technological oil with the ultimate purpose to connect to the ESPO pipeline the fields from the Bolshahet hub of production fields. And on this slide you can clearly see it all. According to the PRMS independent agency, the overall recoverable resources for the transportation through Zaporizhzhia-Purpe pipeline are up to 700 million tons of oil. The second investment project is the construction of the Kuyumba-Taichet pipeline with a length of 700 kilometers and the throughput capacity of 8.6 million tons with the possibility to be expanded up to 15 million tons a year. So I am intentionally giving you so many details because every now and then there is a question. Wouldn't this pipeline remain dry? No, not in any situation, because we've got enough oil to move forward. So going back to the question of interaction between ourselves and our Chinese partners, I believe it is important to know that this cooperation is based upon two intergovernmental agreements dating back to 2009 and 2013 respectively in terms of what we do as the company, which is under a full government control and management. And essentially it's the task of developing the kind of accords which have been reached by our two governments. And I'm absolutely confident that everything we do and the basic components of this cooperation, all of the ensuing issues related to the organization of shipment of oil in compliance with the governmental agreements will continue to be resolved within a friendly environment and upon a very constructive approach. Thank you very much, Mikhail. What I would like to say is that indeed the energy cooperation, something which I mentioned previously, is one of the most successful examples of the cooperation between Russia and China, and as it seems to me, one of the most stable ones because it lies within the interests of the current specialty, and I am sure that it does have a future. There's no doubt about it. The other thing is that Russia has other ambitions apart from the energy industry, and so it would be interesting to understand whether they can be brought in here in as far as the research, science, and cooperation in the educational area is concerned. But further on, I would like to pass the microphone to Mrs. Wu In, former Vice President of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Deputy Chairman of the Society for Theoretical Studies under the People's Political Consultative Council, and the Chairman of the Expert Council of the Russian-Chinese Committee of Peace, Friendship and Development. Mrs. Wu, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. It is a great pleasure for me to participate in today's conference. I also agree that with what has been stated in the opening part of the conference when we heard description of the place for this conference. Whenever we talk about the Sino-Russian relationship, we should talk only about successes. We also ought to see the other side to what this process represents, because when there is a good situation everywhere, we see a great number of challenges and problems. Apart from that, as it is possible through such meetings between experts, we ought to look for the reasons behind these problems, and on such a foundation, whenever possible, to voice various ideas and proposals of how to resolve this issue. So I was able to see that during the opening of this conference, all of the speakers emphasized this point. And so specifically based upon this concept behind this conference, I would like to talk about two aspects. The first one is the state of affairs currently in our relations, and secondly, also consider the kind of future that our relations may have. Now, as far as the first topic was concerned, and specifically the current status of bilateral relations, it is indeed something that you can say a lot about, but I would like to generalize it by two statements. The first one, from the point of view of Russia, and this is something that you know very well, Russia, because it is under an aggressive influence from the United States and the West, is witnessing the worsening of its relationship with the West, but also with the East. And China becomes an important Russia's pivot to the east. As far as China is concerned, to Russia, China is a great nation. On the other hand, it is our neighbor, and that is why bilateral relations between Russia and China have always been the most important bilateral relations. Look how much time I have saved just by making these two statements, generalizing such a vast, area of information in order to fit myself into the allotted timing. So these two questions: what China means to Russia, and what does Russia mean to China? Besides, there are new factors. So what are those? The concept of one belt, one road, and its implementation has become an important part of the Chinese foreign policy, and in what way this may affect Eurasian Economic Union and the attempts to reach cohesion between these two projects. The previous speakers already described how this could be done. So this is a new task, but we similarly see that within this new factor, in the face of it, our bilateral relations continue to preserve high pace of development, which manifests itself in the following things. First of all, I would very briefly describe it. First of all, This is a very intense communication at the very highest level, strengthening of political mutual trust. On the other hand, the second aspect to it is that China and Russia, in different areas of practical interaction and cooperation, continuously deepen and develop and enhance themselves. The practical basis for cooperation is becoming ever more stronger. So this is the second manifestation of the high intensity in our bilateral relations. The third one is the cooperation in the humanitarian area, which consistently expands and deepens. The Chinese-Russian relations and the social foundation and the public opinion are becoming better and better. The fourth manifestation of it is in the fact that, in as far as the regional and international problems are concerned, there is a closer coordination in between our countries. And we were able to find out that essentially China, in terms of all of the regional and global issues, adheres to the position which is either very close or is the same as the Russian one. Apart from it, our both countries support each other in the international arena, acting for each other as important partners. There's fourth manifestation, but the fifth manifestation is that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, guided both by Russia and China, promotes the so-called Shanghai spirit, promoting peace and stability in the region, stimulating economic development of the countries located in that region, as well as strengthening the relations between different other nations. And this kind of role that SCO is playing is increasing. And this is what I wanted to mention about the first topic, very briefly, in a very concise way. So this is my look at the current status of our bilateral relations. Now, let me say a few words about the way we see and what we expect from the development of bilateral relations. I think that, in as far as the future is concerned, we have quite a few dimensions, quite a lot of space to develop into. And so we should cast a comprehensive three-dimensional look at this and analyze and assess the main driving forces and impulses, and ask ourselves a question. Our practical cooperation, does it completely conforms to the interest of our both nations? If we take a look through history, you should know that in the history of the relation between our two countries, there have been very difficult periods. Some are saying that if everything is okay in our relations, then it couldn't be even better. But if everything is bad, then it couldn't even be worse. You can't imagine how worse it could be. So right now, it is necessary to avoid any possible conflict, because in the conflict between Russia and China, there will only be losers. Nobody will be a winner. And that is why it is very important for us to stand by peace and stability between us. If you take a look at it through the economic eye, then an effort to ensure one's own interest serves as a good basis for bilateral relations. And here our interests coincide. Both our countries find it beneficial to exist in the environment of stability and peace regionally. Only through strengthening our cooperation we will be able to effectively respond to attempts made by other countries to achieve hegemonistic positions and force something that we do not find acceptable. Chairman Xi Jinping, on more than one occasion, mentioned that the current situation, when the relation between Russia and China become closer and closer, it's not just anything situational, whereby America is trying to push us and we are forced to unite against it. No, this is a long-term strategic. In China, people are saying that the distant relation is worse than the closest neighbor. And we are closest neighbor. And for real close neighbors, it doesn't matter, the kind of changes taking place in tennis, because the friendship between them and joint action on their part is the choice for many years to come. This is not just, for the sake of the moment. And we are trying to do our best in order to exist in peace for our people, to enjoy more and more benefits out of it. And so I believe this is the kind of the prerequisite based on which I would assess the future of bilateral relations. Being neighbors, we should not pay heed to the external situation. We should do our best in order to have this win-win situation between ourselves and Russia. Russia is currently trying to develop the Far East. First of all, it is necessary to completely utilize the potential in the economic cooperation with China, because we have very serious compatibility between our two economic systems. Now I would like to talk about the problems. In the area of bilateral relations, there practically exists the kind of issues which affect the development of our relations, as well as the kind of issues which demand the most expedient resolution. The first issue is the trading disbalance. It is not sufficiently compliant with our expectations, so here we must urgently do some work based upon the mutually beneficial basis. Apart from it, very good cohesion in our future development plans. This is something that has been discussed more than once, but there is no clear idea in terms of how one should go about it. Apart from it, we should combat the so-called the theory of the Chinese balance, which negatively affects our cooperation. So overall, thanks to the analysis that we undertook, we may consider that our effort aimed at stimulating and developing bilateral relations is not going to falter. And the role played by our country in order to preserve international peace and stability should not change either. So based upon these positions, I believe that we've got great future in the development of our bilateral relations. Thank you very much, Mrs. Wu, for this very emotional and very outspoken presentation. I was able to understand a very important thing from it, as it seems to me, in just what you mentioned as last words, that we don't have a strategy in terms of the problems as to why economic relations do not enjoy any additional development is, first of all, in the lack of strategy. Well, using my right of a moderator, I would like to say, because the strategy usually is the prerogative of the government. Why our relations are supposed to be built upon strategy only, which has been produced by a limited number of people in the high places, maybe like, for example, we heard somebody say previously, small and medium businesses without any strategy could try and work more together. So putting this particular issue up in the air, I would like to pass the floor over to Denis Shulakov, who is the first vice president of Gazprombank. Denis, please. Thank you very much, Evgeny. Before I begin my small presentation, I would not only like to say thanks to the organizer, but also welcome Igor Ivanov, because some time ago he inspired me to come into the Ministry of Foreign Affairs with lectures in his institute, telling students about my story. 10 years I spent in the Russian diplomatic service, and finishing my tenure there in London, already there understanding what financial markets mean and why, whenever we speak today about the new quality in relation between China and Russia, I deemed it necessary to accept this invitation and in my presentation make an emphasis upon this particular aspect in our relations, but to be more specific upon what we lack in our relationships, methodologically and tactically. Well, dear colleagues, this is the slide which shows the correlation between different markets, the markets of stocks and bonds, and the correlation between Russia, China, European zone, Americas, and the neighbors to Russia, China, and Japan, and UK. It is not difficult to see this little circle that Russia represents. It is difficult not to notice that China, in terms of the size of the stock market, is bigger than the Eurozone, and you can ask yourself a lot of questions about where this whole world is going to go when we live in the kind of period of time when negative rates became the phenomenon of our times. In the US market, they're not yet seen, but in the European market, they're already negative. In Switzerland, they're negative. In Japan, they're negative. I mean, for the fact that you've got free cash, you have to pay to the bank for the bank to take it. Now, can we imagine the financial system in America growing at the same kind of pace, or in the European zone, or that is the time now for the new points of growth, and how these points of growth are going to develop without cooperating with each other? I'm trying to raise all of these issues in a preemptive way, because China and Russia are not only neighbors, but they're described by the fact that Russia has the biggest territory, China has the biggest populations, and we're neighbors. Financial markets are not natural resources. They are the result of human activity. Now the question is, can we see Eurozone growing double? If we take a close look at this slide, and China during the past 8 years grew sevenfold. I mean, not 8, but a little bit more than 7. And throughout this time, the European zone, since the day of its concept, grew just twice as much. And so what will be the driving force in the Chinese growth, and Russia, for that matter? So I'm raising this question, and I can tell you one thing, that momentarily, the Russian market, despite the fact that it's a small one, it's the most liberalized market amongst all of the BRICS market countries and amongst the emerging markets as well. These are not cogwells in the Swiss clocks, not even the symbol of 8, which is the luckiest digit in the Chinese philosophy. This slide demonstrates the synchronization of what happens in the Russian and Chinese markets, demonstrating that they're moving in a balanced way, if not coherently. But Russia, in terms of developing its own market, in some ways is ahead of China, although both currencies have undertook tremendous leaps towards internationalization in terms of the volume and the speed of internationalization. RMB is running ahead of ruble, but ruble is doing pretty well. For example, access to non-resident to the Russian market was allowed much earlier than in Russia. Take a look at 9 o'clock in the small cogwheel, and you will see that it was in 1996. Take a look at the 4 o'clock in red in the smaller cogwheel. You will see that that is only when China allowed foreign investors to enter its national market. In 2011, Russia, the Minister of Finance of Russia, makes its first ruble-denominated issues in the international market, while 4 years before that, Gazprombank was the first one to do such an issue in rubles in terms of selling its debt internationally. China started developing its market also in 2007. So principally speaking, we're not only moving in the same direction, but in a very simultaneous manner. So what's in the future for us? During the past 2 years, a colossal leap was undertaken to inform each other about the kind of opportunities that both markets can offer. But this hasn't yet materialized itself in any quality. The recent efforts which were undertaken was signing the agreement to avoid double taxation, which is coming into effect between Russia and Hong Kong in the beginning of next year. These are statistics. I don't want to crash your mind with these figures. I simply would like to say that the Russian markets, or those sanctions in the first place, are undermining the Russian capital market. And in Gazprom, I'm responsible for that. And before that, I was responsible for that in the Barclays Bank in London, having behind me more than 100 ruble-denominated bond issues. I would say that the Russian market turned out to be quite a resilient one, as the English are saying. During the past year, the market was able to raise almost $48 billion only within the Russian domestic market. Seemingly, sanctions, you could expect anything from it, but we were able to do not as bad as was in the record 2013. So the Russian market continues to persevere and attract foreign market money. Very few know that in February last year, when the Minister of Finance of Russia was placing the debut issue of the inflationary bonds, 26% in that issue was bought by our Anglo-Saxon partners, and we were very happy that this issue for the first time saw the investors from Hong Kong and from China, and specifically ICBC Bank, our colleagues here. Whenever we talk about China, whenever we talk about Hong Kong, whenever we talk about the financial power in those markets, we mean not some kind of imaginary category. We mean very specific capabilities. Just look at the amount of money that is the total one in terms of the money already invested into the financial securities, the debts and stocks in Asia. 36.6 trillion. 1% of this amount is more than the whole of the Russian debt market within this current period. In Hong Kong only, under the management, you find almost 18 trillion US dollars. The 30 of which are the money belonging to Chinese and Hong Kong investors, while the rest represents the rest of Asia, and not only Asia. So these two slides don't really try and make anything out of them. They simply show that the markets are on the upgoing trend, or principally speaking, moving towards the same destination, which is upwards. In terms of the qualitative characteristics, it should be understood that both Russia and China principally are looking at the market utilization principles in terms of the domestic market in the same way. 30–40% are the government borrowers in the Russian and Chinese markets, and there's nothing bad about it. Now, what are we to do further on? Yes, there are certain restrictions imposed upon Russia, I mean, in terms of certain companies and industries, in terms of access to capital markets. I wouldn't like to really let anybody down under this environment. We understand quite well that for Hong Kong investors, this could be a problem. But as far as the platform is concerned upon which we can do it today, the Moscow Exchange, I don't know whether we have a representative from it here, is fully organized in order to do issues in RMB, and more than 20 Russian companies have registered their platforms for this purpose. It was just before this session we tried to agree how to do a debut issue this year so as to be denominated in RMBs in the Moscow Exchange. And the very last thing. This is the slide which is not a joke. This is not just a symbol of 8. You can see that, well, in its purpose, if we measure the length of the digit 8, then the length when the line is in the form of the digit 8 takes a lesser space. If you unfold it, it covers a much bigger space. Now, take a look at the top part of this 8. This is the Russian little market. The bigger part of it is the Chinese market. If we unite them, just imagine the kind of territory, and I'm just describing it through the word of territory, but you can show it also through figures, could be covered simply through the kind of opportunities that you can find today in China, investment opportunities that Russia today is proposing, and the kind of growth that we can offer to each other, irrespective of any problems and without going to war against anyone. Colleagues, thank you very much for your attention. I would like to conclude with a statement of what is written here. The future belongs to those who can see it before others do. Let's try and see it then. Thank you. Thank you. Who will tell us, from my point of view, possibly would also be referring to the very same process taking place in the financial markets, and we will see the extent to which your vision may coincide or not. Mr. Lee Win-sun, the president of the ICBC Bank, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak at this conference and meet my Russian colleagues. The banks I represent was established in 1984, and in 2006, on the 27th of October, in Hong Kong at the Shanghai Exchange, it held the ceremony of the inauguration of its transactions. Throughout 30 years, our bank has transformed itself into a well-known brand in China, as well as into the international bank, which plays an important role in the global financial system. In 1992, we began the process of internationalization, globalization rather, and by the end of last year, we have been represented already in 42 countries, where we created more than 400 different structures, including in the 6 countries where we became an authorized banking representative of China, and as far as the RMB clearing is concerned, as a result, we can offer to more than 6,000 entities and 500 million individuals a full spectrum of financial support. Our bank currently, in terms of the international market, has entered into the 4.0 era where we actively apply networking instruments as well as do our best in order to comply with the contemporary requirements. In terms of the Russian and Chinese relations and financial relations represent an important component which stimulates the development of trade, offers new employment opportunities and helps in other areas. Our bank views the Russian market as a strategic post. At the end of 2007, our bank created a subsidiary 100% owned office in Moscow, and during these 9 years, our Moscow bank has undertaken all the efforts in order to promote cooperation in the financial area between the two countries, supporting economic and trading relations. We actively participate in the de-dollarization issues, promoting our settlements in the national currency, stimulating integration processes, and so one can say that we uphold the pace of the development of the globalization of RMB. We became an important player in this kind of a settlement market where the biggest share is what we account for. So with the support from the central bank, we are actively developing the financial derivatives linked to rubles and RMB, creating a platform for RMB transacting in the domestic and offshore markets, as well as promoting the RMB-denominated issues. We utilize the model financial resources plus financial competencies, offering comprehensive financial services, and are doing our best, and as far as those structures which invest into the Russian economy to provide full set of advisory services, offering comprehensive solutions, and utilize the state-of-the-art achievement in science and technology in order to manage logistical and financial flows in real time. We're doing our best to support with our services and products the most important economic entities, both in upstream and downstream. We are confident that the development of trade and economic area, and as far as the relations between our countries are concerned, do carry a lot of potential. Now, let me offer a few proposals. First of all, we suggest that within the financial area, we should establish as soon as possible the system of mutually acceptable financial ratings and criteria for project finance, as well as the system of lending control. We would also like to develop the ruble and RMB derivatives market and actively apply hedge governance instruments in relationship to risks related to the exchange rate, interest rate, and inflation. This way, we'll be able to promote the development of financial cooperation between us. Thirdly, we need to set up a bilateral mechanism for financial information exchange, so as to be able to gather, study, and assess such information, so as to strengthen our risk mitigation capabilities, effectively deal with the kind of situation whereby sometimes information on both sides is different. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Li. It is on purpose that I decided not to present any comments after Denis's presentation, because I thought that it would be correct for the two representatives of the financial sector to make their presentations, and after that I could comment on the fact that the economic growth of China, the huge prospects of Russia, huge capabilities of both Russian and Chinese markets, nevertheless avoided the fact that financial flows, mutual flows between Russia and China are quite modest. We are not rushing to invest a lot into China, no matter how huge prospects of China there are. And the same way, the same holds true of China, at least judging from what I am listening to right now. China is not rushing to get into the market of Russia, irrespective of the fact that there are lots of projects that might be interesting for China, how capitals are not flowing. So in terms of the language, Denis, you used, the figure 8, there are certain bottlenecks still between these two parts of the figure 8, and it is quite surprising how it can happen. Indeed, the ICBC has its office in Russia, but I cannot say that your transactions here are not that active. At least they are not corresponding to the scope of operations of your bank. I beg my pardon. I keep telling you some provocative thoughts, and you will be free to comment on them when we proceed with the live discussion. Now I would like to give the floor to Kilzie, Chairman of the Board of Directors of CREON Energy. Please take the floor. Thank you very much. I'll try to answer the question that you keep raising for the third or the fourth times. Well, first of all, I would like to thank Mr. Evgeny for this possibility to talk to you. I would like to thank the RIAC team, its members, for the wonderful organization of today's deliberations. I would like to thank my Chinese colleagues. I've met lots of scientists and researchers today. As far as I understand, in the form of recommendations, the outcomes of today's event are going to be finalized. Now, answering to your question, the question of conditions put forth by our Chinese partners, I can say that they are unacceptable. That is why there are no investments flowing into the Russian economy. I am a representative of a real economy, a real sector. I work in the energy sector, in fuel and energy complex, in the sector of processing. I heard the presentation of Madam Law from Sapsa company. I'm quite aware of the mechanism this company is using in its activities. And what I would propose is the following. In China, a set of the Chinese companies getting to the Russian market is quite limited. Due to the fact that the Chinese companies are not well acquainted with the Russian market, so the set of conditions that is being proposed is the following. The first thing, low level of financing, low interest rate, upon the condition when there is a general contract, when technologies are being supplied, and the market that is offered at the offtake basis. So, in fact, we have no say in our projects. The Samsung company, in the same way as many other companies, worked in Belarus and Kazakhstan. Some Chinese companies are operating in Peru, in Libya, in Syria, in Iraq. But we are none of those countries. We are Russia. We have our high technological capability. We have our own technologies that were discovered and transferred to China 30, 40, or 50 years ago. I attended the meetings between the Chinese companies and their counterparts, and our Chinese partners have patents for the designing which they obtained from Russian representatives. That is why to say that there are any other reasons impeding the capital inflow would be wrong, because capital is always willing to be applied in any country, and it will flow into Russia only upon the condition that our Chinese colleagues would meet us halfway in terms of the conditions they are putting forth. It is a long process. This process have been developed between the Chinese companies and many other third countries, but these conditions are to be adjusted to our environment. What I would propose, while macro documents are being elaborated upon at the level of the Eurasian Economic Union and Silk Road Economic Belt, we could come up with some sort of a roadmap, let's say until 2020 or 2025, which would provide for the investments outside the risks which our Chinese partners might feel. For example, 1,000 cubic meters of gas costs from 1,800 to 2,100 rubles, which is 30 to 35 euros. The price that is extremely low for processing and is extremely attractive for any capital. Another example, China consumes a lot of methanol and mineral fertilizers. The cost price of those is again extremely low in Russia. And if we are to study the mechanism for the Chinese investors entering the Russian economy throughout 5 or 10 years, then there will no longer be such opportunities. They will become irrelevant after a certain period of time. Now, turning to our future cooperation outside the commodity sector. I'm not an expert in this field. Probably there are many others who would specialize in non-commodity sector, but once again, we highly depend on this non-commodity sector due to the fact that the financial tools which you are going to offer to us are oriented on these very specifics. That is why, as partners, you, Gazprombank and ICBC, could discuss all those aspects and come up with a proposal according to which you could introduce investments and according to which a certain formula for such investments could be developed. That's it. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank Mr. Fess. Finally, I've heard a concrete problem that is on the table related to our cooperation, the rates for incoming capital, Chinese capital, which are quite low, but there are many other aspects which the Chinese business community is willing to gain and what the Russian business community is not willing to give or to yield. Yesterday at the expo session, I heard quite an alternative point of view. We give resources to you which you need so much, but why would you believe that the rules based on which the resources are given are to be defined by you? Maybe that would be the topic of further discussions, and your late sentence is related to exactly this very problem. Last year, net outflow of capital amounted to $1 trillion, which means that China is investing abroad quite actively. As a result of this year, with 3 or 4 months, the net outflow of the Chinese capital reached 400 million. So it keeps investing, although this capital does not go to the destination, which is highly approved according to the political statements. Maybe it's high time to work on the rules rather than the strategy. Maybe instead of imposing the requirements to various Chinese companies to go somewhere, to invest something, maybe it is worth developing a road, two-way street through which this capital might flow back and forth. Maybe that's where we're underperforming. Maybe that is why from political commitments they are not translating into economic solutions. I would like to give the floor to a person who knows about that much more. That is Andrey, Klepach, Deputy Chair and member of the board of Vnesheconombank. He is also a member of the Russian International Affairs Council. The floor is yours. Thank you very much, Evgeny. Well, I would answer in the same way as the ancient Greeks used to answer, I know the only thing that I don't know anything. Well, indeed, there are huge opportunities for mutual trade. If we go back to the 50s and the beginning of the 60s, over 60% of machinery export of Russia and the countries of the Eastern Bloc came to China. And now, our export to China in terms of machinery is over 600 million per year if we're not taking into account military technical equipment. So these indicators are quite dismal. Well, lots of aspects are to be taken into account. However, the puzzle doesn't work out. There were lots of goals that were set forth, but because of the decline of prices and physical volumes of trade, which stood at 61 last year, and this contraction continues. Although our goals are very ambitious, the real indicators are quite modest. According to the central bank, our cooperation stands at 1.5 billion. Again, a very modest indicator. The conditions put forth by the Chinese business community do not satisfy the Russian business community, because Russian business community is a sovereign. They don't want to lose all the rights, but it does not mean that they are not willing to reach compromises, to come to certain agreements. And as an example, I could cite the successful agreement reached with Rosneft and Novatek. There are many other projects. Yes, indeed, there is a problem, but there are successful examples of long-term projects. As far as I understand, today, Moscow-Kazan project was under discussion. If it is launched, it could turn into the Moscow-Kazan-Beijing project. The value of that will be from 3 up to 7 trillion. No matter what difficulties might arise, I believe that this project could have a bright future, and we will be able to come to an agreement. The same holds true of financial markets. Denis has mentioned that unique opportunities are popping up in this field, and we won't be able even to dodge from these opportunities. And even despite the fact that China is not involved in the sanctions against Russia, the Chinese companies are forced to follow these very rules. Again, there are huge capabilities that haven't been tapped. Denis said that Hong Kong is over 20 trillions. Most of that accounts for China. Although the total amount of debt amounts to only 2 or 3 billion. In yuans, the volume of loans over this year might stand roughly at 500 or 700 million US dollars, which means that these are just the first steps. We are just trying our way forward as a small kid. In terms of purchasing power parity, China is a leader today. Russia is lagging behind significantly. Nevertheless, it has huge human resources capabilities, project capabilities, and what we need is how to put all of it together. No ready-made answers can be found here, but still, as it has been proposed, we could go the way the development of roadmaps, but roadmaps would imply a plan consisting of a number of steps. I understand that there is a permission of the bank, but it's still the yuan bonds haven't been placed in China. The same mechanism was approved in Russia, but it hasn't been launched. So we've got huge experience of implementing joint projects. We have huge experience in the area of high technologies and military and technical cooperation, and this experience goes well beyond with India, goes well beyond what we have in China, with China. Unfortunately, as of now, we manage only to come to certain agreements instead of implementing them. Although the Russian, German, many other businesses have come this way by joint ventures. And again, strenuous efforts are required on the side of Russia and on the side of China. And in the conclusion, what I would like to note, even regarding settlements in yuan, if I remember the indicators or figures of central bank correctly, I can say that non-dollar settlements account for 6% of Russian exports into China, and the share of yuan in those settlements is only 2%. That is why, in addition to the system of bonds and investments, we need to come up with the efficient system of settlements and bring it to the level with which we are enjoying with Kazakhstan and Belarus, because with respect to these countries, we moved to settlements in national currencies, and here hedge mechanisms and many other mechanisms are to be developed. And it holds true not only of large-scale projects, it holds true of SMEs. We have a high level of remunerations and shuttle trade. That is why the capabilities here are enormous as well. So probably separate tools within the framework of roadmaps could be developed instead of waiting until the bridge over the Amur River is finalized. Well, naturally it will happen at some point of time, but we shouldn't wait until then. And so despite all the problems, today in the morning, Sergei Lavrov mentioned that cooperation between Russia and China is a role model of political cooperation of the 21st century. However, I believe that we have all the chances to come up with a model of economic cooperation. In many ways, we are faced with the same goals, with the same tasks. So both of us have the task of development. Even our priorities are the same, although deadlines might be different. You're trying to make the task of attaining 6.5% growth goal compatible with the task to eliminate poverty. But these are the tasks that can hardly be compatible. Nevertheless, our tasks in many ways could be compared to those of the OECD countries. There are lots of areas, technological cooperation, both Russia and China, or together Russia and China, represent the biggest group of engineers and scientists, although in terms of investments into R&D, we lag behind developed countries. Still, here Russia has huge engineering capabilities. Russia has a very interesting national technological initiative, which is very much like your own program in this field. However, we failed to develop a cooperation mechanism. You offered to develop the foundation of innovative technologies and solutions. Nevertheless, we failed to come up with a joint model of cooperation in this field. I believe that from that point of view, this conference might be very useful in terms of developing roadmaps for cooperation in the area of joint research and high technologies. I believe that despite all the problems we are facing, we have big future. Our history lasts for many thousands of years. Our history is very long-standing, but still we are finding ourselves at a very early stages of joint relations. But hopefully, at some point, we'll be able to grow up. Well, thank you very much. I liked your view regarding generating new opportunities. I believe that's what we need, and roadmaps is about generating opportunities, and I believe that it would be very important. And if in Russia, mostly big companies are trading with China, whereas in China, it is only SMEs that trade with Russia. Who is the biggest a client of AliExpress abroad. That is Russia. Everything is quite easy. That is the problem why our cooperation is stalling a bit. It is because the SMEs of China are presenting their projects to large-scale companies of Russia, whereas large-scale companies from Russia are only limited to cooperation with SMEs, and their goals and tasks might be different. Now I would like to give the floor to Valery Krukov, Deputy Director for Science of the Institute of Economics and Industrial Engineering of the Siberian branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Good day, dear colleagues. I would like to thank Mr. Ivanov and his colleagues for this invitation to attend such an interesting, thought-provoking conference which is practical as well. I'm specializing in the economy of Siberia. Let me remind you of the beginning of today's conference when we were talking about various dates in the history of Russia-China relations. I got back from Arkhangelsk not long ago. Arkhangelsk is celebrating the anniversary of the finalization of one of the largest projects in the Russian Empire. In 1916, the road was constructed that saved lots of Russian workers. During the First World War, lots of those involved in the construction of the Chinese railroad were transferred to the construction of the road from Arkhangelsk. That is why we have a lot of experience of our cooperation. Since not much time is left, I'll try to be very concise. First of all, I wanted to mention that the pivot to the east in political, economic and resource standpoints is very logical. From the point of resources, it's not about conditions put forth by the Chinese companies, although this problem is quite substantial. It is about the fact that models and approaches to implement or to generate potential benefits from the resource capabilities that Russia has in the East go back to the industrial era. Large-scale projects, large-scale state-owned companies, intergovernmental agreements. I'm going to give you details on slides. I would like to show to you that the risks are huge, costs are very high, fields are not that big, which means that risk-sharing agreements are needed, wider participation of companies involved in research and expertise is needed. That is why there is a high need to turn to a new model of economic cooperation. It relates not only to interstate cooperation, but cooperation in the area of mineral resources. Still, another very important aspect here, according to the Shatinsk branch of the Siberian Academy of Sciences, the Russian-Chinese cross-border cooperation needs to be revitalized from the point of view of principles and approaches to this interaction. And everything should not boil down to the projects implemented at the level of large-scale corporations. We need to engage all the links of this chain. That is how the modern mineral resources sector differs from what happened in the past. We need to differentiate between those who supply equipment, those who come up with engineering solutions, rather than boil down everything to those who actually get access to the Chinese market. That is the map. We would need no any comments on it. Lots of resources, insufficient reserves, and dear colleagues, it's time to expeditiously share risks. The reserves are decreasing. That is why all sets of approaches related to the implementation of projects should be adjusted. Here is the characteristics of some of mining projects in the far east of Russia, which indicates that the share of difficult and costly fields is growing. So, what's going on in the minerals and commodity sector? The approach that used to be employed in the past, when the high rent, high margin is being derived from projects, is over. In the eastern Siberia, there are no more large-scale fields that took place in West Siberia. No such fields have been discovered. The fields that are discovered in the Far East are much more difficult in terms of their composition and in terms of their development. That should be taken into account when large-scale infrastructure projects are being developed. These fields are very remote, and the most important question, what is to be done? We need to come up with a procedure of sharing risks and costs among all the participants of those activities, including the Chinese partners. So various modes of cooperation, public-private partnership, the co-participation in the development of mineral resources based on the agreements signed. Lots of agreements actually have been signed, but not so many projects that have been implemented. Not a single project, large-scale project, has been implemented yet. So that explains the stagnation in the indicators demonstrating economic cooperation between the countries. New sources, whether there are any, yes, there are some. I'd like to draw attention to two unique projects. These are the fields of rare earth metals Tantor field. 1 ton costs $8,000 or $9,000. So just compare these prices to the oil price. Yet another field, Popiga field, which is a field of rare earth metals that has no alternatives in the world. And these projects are very intensive and they require large-scale cooperation, not only with the Chinese partners, but with many other partners. Besides, no less than 2/3 of projects at the Baikal region are related to the production of natural resources, no processing, no added value, no diversification are involved. No incentives have been created that in the conditions of the Baikal region would make deep-level processing much more attractive rather than the supply of ready-made goods. So on the whole, the Siberian economists have to state that the Russia-China cross-border cooperation has not turned into an important factor for the growth of economies of the east of Russia. I'm not mentioning all the agreements and high-level meetings that have taken place that look in the future. What we need is to develop processing projects. We need to distribute costs evenly. Just have a look at the standard pyramid of consequences. It means that high revenue markets are very narrow and they would require significant efforts. And approaches that used to be applied at the industrial era need to be adjusted to this new reality. This issue was raised this session as well as the previous sessions, and it continues to be highly relevant. Thank you very much for your attention. I would like to thank you, Mr. Krukov. I was just thinking when to share this very comment, and I believe now it's high time to do that. It is about the projects, and that is true. Well, I've seen the list of projects that was submitted to the Intergovernmental Committee. Well, we state that we want to cooperate in the area of science, high technologies, we want to exchange and transfer technologies, whereas the majority of projects come from the commodity sector. And what we needed, the Chinese finances only. With that, the Chinese companies have their own way to cooperate with other partners. What we decided to do is not to let them projects they would like to have. What we asked from them is only finances. That is why nothing good came out of this intergovernmental committee. Maybe because the projects that were submitted were wrong. There were only 2 projects on this list that were related to high technologies and services. Maybe the list of projects ought to be changed and the requests ought to be modified if we want to receive something different from our Chinese friends. That is a thought for consideration. Now the floor goes to Vladimir Sofin, Director of the Department for Technological Development and Innovations at RUCN2016. Well, once again, thank you very much for this invitation. It is always a great pleasure to attend this platform. We believe that energy integration is very useful. RUCN2016 company is the company that transmits electricity and capacities through trunk lines and transmission lines. Over the last year, changes have taken place that makes us revisit the requirements put forth to development of the energy sector and technologies. The key changes that have taken place include the following. The consumer has changed completely. It put forth completely different requirements. The energy conservation, energy efficient technologies are becoming more relevant, as well as new energy models are to be developed. Besides, new technologies for the transmission of electricity are being developed. They include high temperature superconductivity, the use of composite materials during the transmission of electricity. The structure of generating capacities has changed a lot as well. Its structure is mostly focused on the distributed generation, and one of the factors here to take into account is renewables. All these changes dictate the need to develop a completely new energy system and the development of new markets. That is why a very important component in terms of domestic integration should be interstate integration that would generate new level of effects. This very slide demonstrates those effects. That is a development of the intersystemic energy interconnections that would reduce increase technological reserves. It would increase the efficiency of equipment. Sometimes the energy equipment is not working to its full capacity, and take into account market conditions and regulatory framework. Energy flows could take place on a day and night basis, when at night time the equipment could be used for the transmission to other countries. It has also be a peak-based transmission. We also shouldn't forget about intellectual and technological integration, as has been mentioned by Mr. Klepach, the development of technological standards, the transfer of technologies, and environmental globalization should be one of the priorities in the area of energy integration. And once again, environmentally friendly energy should be the prerequisite of sustainability. Recently, in the Russian Federation, there has been presented the publication of famous Chinese energy specialist Hu Jinlai, who recently was in the chair board of the largest electricity company of China. The slogan of this book is, "There's always sun shining in some part of the world, and there's always wind blowing in other parts of the world." That is why the essence of energy integration boils down to the need to redistribute resources. I'm referring to clean resources, to renewable resources, which are in abundance in the world for the consumption, for meeting the consumption needs of the Eurozone and the American continent. That what was mentioned at the UN summit by the Chinese leader when he announced the Summit for Sustainable Development, when he announced that China is going to move along this way of development, and he invited all interested parties, scientists and experts to join this movement. A relevant company was set up, not commercial partnership, which comprises over 80 countries and separate stakeholders from academia, from forensic organizations who are going to shape the technological principle of this kind of electricity transmission. And secondly, they're going to develop the business model and basic principles guiding the economic implementation of these projects. And thirdly, the necessary regulatory measures which are to be taken in the countries, because it is no secret that the electricity markets are not global in their nature. Even at such a continent as Eurasia, these markets are separated. There is the market of the EU, consisting of a number of markets. There is the market of Russia and China and so on and so forth. Russia today is home to 11 intergovernmental interconnections through its electricity grids. These interconnections, 11 interconnections, is quite good. Although the volume of electricity that is being transmitted is dismal, it is extremely low. Unfortunately, we export less than 2% of all the electricity generated at the territory of the Russian Federation. Although technologically wise, the result could have been much higher, because according to the system operator of the Russian Federation, our energy system, as of 1st of May 2016, the excessive capacities reached over 40 gigawatts. And if we to preserve the technological interconnections that we have, these capacities could have been exported. Export to China is limited again, which is only 3.5 billion kilowatts per hour per year. Right now, we've got 3 interconnections with China, which are in charge of such flows. If we to have a look at the territory of East Siberia and the Far East, its capabilities amount to 5 gigawatts of capacity of power that could be transmitted to our Chinese, Korean and Mongolian neighbors who are interested in energy integration projects in the Far East. Speaking about the balance of power, both in the east of Siberia and in the east of Russia, we are facing a surplus. Together with China, we're working on extending these capacities. Together with the Chinese investors and Chinese companies, we could start developing clean energy. As an example, I would like to cite the Sakhalin project aimed at the construction of the wind farm. There are 3 corridors. Western corridor up to 14 gigawatts, and the Far Eastern up to 8 gigawatts, and the East Siberian up to 11 gigawatts. So total flows, bear in mind that new generation capacity are going to be developed, could reach up to 33 gigawatts. In order to implement all these initiatives, including the strategy that is being implemented by the People's Republic of China, 2 months ago, a bilateral memorandum was signed in Beijing between our company, State Company of China, Electricity Corporation, and SoftBank of Japan, related to relevant technological research and research into business models, with the aim to come up with a unified roadmap of integrating energy systems of in the northeast of Asia. On Friday, I got back from Korea, where We discussed the composition of this working group and the roadmap. Today, Mr. Bernikov, who should have made a presentation, is going to Japan to have a meeting with SoftBank in order to come up with concrete steps and measures aimed at the further implementation of this project. I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you very much. Well, the project of possible export of electricity and the connection of our grids, this project for me is much more enticing than mere supplies of energy sources. The thing is that it is much more difficult to export electricity. Some sort of a modernization might be needed, and not all the stakeholders could be ready for that. Now the floor goes to Nadorshin, director of the Center for Russia Central Asia Studies at the Fudan University. Please take the floor. A number of brief remarks with respect to our joint report. I tried to be brief so that I could be limited to 7 or 8 minutes. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the Russian International Affairs Council for a very interesting, highly intellectual and organizational work. Great thanks to Lausanne professor and his team for persistent, strenuous efforts, because our joint report has become a success. First of all, thanks to their efforts. Thank you very much for that. 2 comments I would like to share with you. Well, first of all, I believe that this report is a good opportunity to take stock of our achievements. I believe that the Russian-Chinese relations require qualitative development. What does it mean? Well, first of all, it means building trust. Secondly, it means progress in the area of the development of comprehensive and systemic relations in all the areas of practical interaction. In relation to these 2 indicators, I can say that last year, the year that has elapsed, is quite successful for the cooperation between Russia and China. The Russian-Chinese relations withstood a lot of difficult developments. We know that the world is faced today with constant shocks and turbulence. The crisis in Syria, the crisis in Ukraine, the problem around the South China Sea, the crisis at the Korean Peninsula, and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, the Russian-Chinese relations have managed to come out of these difficulties safe and sound. I would not say that we're uniform in all the aspects. Not all our approaches are the same. What is important, though, is that despite all the developments, the relations between Russia and China continue to be based on trust. We continue to understand each other, and that is very important. That's the first thing. And secondly, as has been mentioned already, we have brought our relations to a strategic consensus on interconnecting the Silk Road Economic Belt and the Eurasian Economic Union, which is a very important achievement indeed. Although our trade volumes kept contracting in figures. Expected levels haven't been achieved. Well, it is a concern for us indeed. At the same time, there are lots of achievements and lots of progress, which means that the Russian-Chinese cooperation is extending and is becoming more profound. The trend that has emerged to develop a comprehensive and efficient interconnection in the economic area is on the rise, and the same can be said about the energy sector. Now, turning to the humanitarian contexts, I think that certain positive developments are taking place. I'm not going to speak about the image of China in Russia because it is up to the Russians to decide, but I believe that the image of Russia for China is improving. The encounters at the grassroots levels are perceived positively. Russia is perceived as a country as is capable of fighting against hegemony. The Russian culture is gradually spreading in the Chinese society. Not only classic culture, but also a modern one. I would not argue that it is extremely popular, but these phenomena have popped up already in China, nevertheless. For example, at the beginning of this month, we celebrated Mother's Day. Probably you did the same. And there is a Russian song, Mother, that is spreading throughout the Chinese community. We have our own social networks, similar to Kontakty or Odnoklassniki social networks in Russia. And interconnections between those social networks, they are spreading as well. That is why there are more efficient communication tools today, because they are much closer to people and to the heart of grassroots. And thirdly, I believe that people-to-people contacts between Russia and China drive closer affinity between the peoples of the two countries. Before, there were lots of claims related to xenophobia and many other such developments. Now these trends have diminished. Okay, sorry. That was the third point I wanted to say. I'll get back to my second remark, and if we have some time, maybe later in our discussions, I'll turn to the third one. So, with respect to the second remark, I'm going to speak about differences that we have, and it is related to our joint report. And I would give the floor to my colleague. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chao. I beg my pardon that I have to interrupt you, but I just need to leave some time to give a floor to yet another speaker at least, and after that I promised to take questions from the audience. Now the floor goes to Sergei Lizanin, Acting Director of the Institute of the Far Eastern Studies, who is also a member of the Russian International Affairs Council. Now you can have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, dear friends, dear colleagues. It is a great pleasure for me to announce that within the framework of the RIAC program, in cooperation with the Institute of the Far Eastern Studies, the second report 2016 model has been accomplished. It was published just a couple of days before our conference started. This report consists of an enormous intellectual power, both of Russia and China. It is the result of the work of experts. It includes lots of statistics. For the first time, it has a new division related to monitoring. Here you can see just main developments, whereas in the electronic version you can follow the links for further details, which will be very convenient for researchers and their work. And what is even more important, it is a joint report. Leading Orientalists, leading Russian experts specializing on China, and leading Chinese experts specializing on Russia under the guidance of the Russian International Affairs Council, and personally by the president of RIAC, correspondent member of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Mr. Ivanov, this report has been accomplished. To be frank, the work was very difficult because in this very thin leaflet you can find only a concise information related to all the factors of the Russian-Chinese cooperation. I'm not going to tell you what this report is about. You can have access to this report. I'm not going to read it aloud. Based on what has been written here and bringing together everything that has been said right now and at previous sessions, I'm going to share with you 5 comments in the follow-up to this report. First of all, global developments and their impact on the Russian-Chinese relations. A very important comment made by Mr. Trenin and academician Rogov with respect to the change of eras and in what way Russia and China should respond to it, because the classic balance between economy and politics is being changed. Many states put economic expediency as a sacrifice, as a hostage to political interests. As an example, sanctions against Russia can be cited, and there are lots of such examples. Secondly, globally, systemic challenges are growing. Quasi-state, the Islamic State, many other challenges. But most important is that the Americans are using this factor, actually devaluating and revisiting the well-established global governance system. What does the TPP mean? It is the WTO devaluation. It is an attempt to go well beyond the WTO well-established standards and norms. The same holds true of the transatlantic partnership. Now, about the regional dimension of the Russian-Chinese partnership, all of it is presented in detail in this report. Economy, politics, the Korean Peninsula, particularly North Korea. It is very good that there is a consensus in the Security Council. It is very good that there is a mutual understanding on a number of other issues. What is of concern is the South China Sea. However, both Russia and China are sticking to one and the same position. There can be only bilateral format to address current disputes without any arbitration or alliances, because that would undermine all the efforts. Fourth, General Bushinsky was right when saying that Russia and China are close to the line that stands in the way of alliance rather than just strategic cooperation, although Russia and China are not ready to cross this line to move towards the alliance. The United States have their allies, although these come from the outcomes of the Second World War. Nevertheless, the strategic format contains the elements of very close relations similar to alliance. The American factor, it has been presented here as well. Well, naturally, the rise of China is perceived by the United States from the point of view of containment. It has been discussed at length from military, political, and economic standpoints. And finally, the bilateral format, trade and economic dimensions. At this very session, all of the details have been presented. The report does not idealize the real picture. Russian and Chinese approaches are presented in this report. These approaches do not always converge, and that is quite normal. We're striving to reach a compromise. Unfortunately, the two-story structure, when everything is heated in politics, everything is cold in economy, maintains. But we are working on it. Sanctions against Russia are bearing fruit. The export of grains into China is increasing. And there are many other positive results and effects of that. That is a separate topic. What is most important is that the Russian-Chinese format is alive and kicking. It is developing and it has bright future. Now, due to the strict time limits, I'd like to comment on the following. In the new tracks for future development, a lot has been said about the SCO. However, the idea of the establishment of the free trade area by 2020, I believe that this idea might be very fruitful and it might be very useful. Yes, indeed, there is a lot to agree upon in this area from the point of view the Silk Road Economic Belt and the Eurasian Economic Union and this well-known alignment or interconnection. There are even new hieroglyphs and meaning this very new phenomenon. Dear colleagues, that is the second report. That is a modest contribution, a modest stone in the foundation of the Russian-Chinese cooperation. Thank you very much. Thank you. I would highly recommend to get acquainted with this report. It is politically correct and it is quite informative. Now, dear colleagues, you have a chance to ask a number of questions. I can see 2 hands in the air. What we need is a mic, since there is a simultaneous interpretation provided. If we have enough time, we'll have a chance to ask the third question. Good day, my name is Georgi. I've got a practical question to Mr. Levinson, to Denis Vladimirovich and Dmitry Nikolaevich. Speaking about the SMEs, I've heard on many occasions that it's very important to develop the SMEs. You know that the ownership form with limited liability companies well spread. What would be the response to that of the Chinese companies who are trying to carry out underwriting in China, trying to ensure various trade transactions with us? So we keep working on an advance payment model using very costly mechanisms. Are there any thoughts on your side so that in some way bring closer the underwriting principles with our models, so that the Chinese companies and Chinese banks and Chinese insurance companies could perceive us adequately and could ensure debit operations of those companies who are working with us? And again, that in the context of the SMS. Well, you named me first, that is why I will try to answer first. That is a private question, but it raises all that is related to the topic because of which I'm here. In the Russia-Chinese trade, what we lack is a financial instrument as a result of which we could forecast the value of your cash flows in a different currency. Is there anyone in the audience who could tell with certain accuracy what would be the spot price of ruble or yuan? No one would be able to answer that, but you know how it will, the price of dollar, and do you know what will be the price in a year? And again, you could tell everything with respect to dollar, even for a 1-year period. You can use Bloomberg and use this formula. That is why what we need for Russia in China to use national currency settlement, we need to issue debts in national currencies of each other with the help of investors of our own countries. And to start this work, we need to involve finance ministry so that to avoid the risk curve. After that, banks and companies are going to issue that. And in a year, you will be able to know the value of your borrowings and other currencies. And after that, you'll be able to use a direct exchange rate, bypassing dollar, and after that, companies will be able to get guided by this very formula in their settlements and in their future operations. Thank you. Let me add to this. Our bank, the ICBC bank, is right now under an experiment related to the issuance of a new financial product with the validity of up to 6 months. After that, their validity will be extended to 9 months, with the possibility of extending the period of up to 12 months. We count on the support from the government and from the capital market. Well, I believe that as soon as we are going to have much more such tools, we will be able to increase the number of transactions settled in national currencies. Thank you. Well, Vnesheconombank does not give loans to the SMEs. Well, yes, indeed, there are loans related to export transactions, but they are not with respect to small, medium enterprises. With respect to large-scale projects, there is a number of projects based on yuan financing. There are certain problems related to hedging. How I think that your question is much broader. This question is mostly related to the conditions based on which the Chinese insuring companies would be ready to provide security and to insure these operations. And it is all related to the way how risks are being assessed. I believe that with respect to the roadmap that has to do with the Russian-Chinese investments and contract-based relations between Russia and China, all these issues are to be discussed. The second question. Thank you. My name is Kuvaldin. I'm from the Moscow State University. I don't have the briefest or the most practical question. Nevertheless, 3 years ago, in this very hall, under the leadership of Mr. Ivanov, the RIAC organized a meeting with our partners from the European Union. Perfectly organized meeting, wonderful words. At the very end, I expressed a view according to which words are one thing and deeds are completely different. In a year, the Ukrainian crisis broke out. Naturally, the relations with China are evolving in a bit different dimension. I'm not an expert on China or on Oriental studies. I've always been specializing in the United States, in the West, and in Europe. But still, between even more encouraging words and practical results of the cooperation between Russia and China, and in line with the questions raised by the moderator, there is a gaping difference which is quite disillusioning. That is why I would like to get an answer to the question: why is it so that we treat each other so perfectly well, and then why, at the same time, it is so difficult to promote our cooperation and to make it to develop at a faster pace? Well, since that question was addressed to me, I'll try to give you my version, which was actually expressed between the presentations of my colleagues. Everything is very easy. Our cooperation is mostly political, with the agenda which is counterproductive rather than constructive. It turned out that we're against instability, we're against someone else who is trying to destabilize the political frameworks. And it should be understood that there is mutual sympathy between our leaders. I'm not an expert in policy, but from what I see, their personal relations are quite good. That is the reason behind our friendship. It is not in specific benefits, in strategic interests. And in order to make it more constructive, we need to make an effort to put it in that very dimension. From political dimension, we need to move to the dimension of specific solutions. I doubt the efficiency of roadmaps and bilateral political solutions. I believe that what we need to work on is to explain how the Western, European and American and German companies are operating in Russia, so that the Chinese business could understand what approaches would be welcomed in Russia. And the Russian business should know more about the practices behind the Chinese business and culture. Most importantly, having been able to agree at the level of political leaders, so we lack mutual understanding at a lower level. We need to bring together the two cultures of business development, and there are lots of differences there. If I remember correctly, there was a work of Kilzie, as I was told, which is a framework for businessmen in China. That is a great piece of news for me, and it is perceived for me as a strategic document. It could be compared to the works of Mikhail. I haven't heard that the Machiavelli works are welcomed in the area of economic activities. So now I think I'd rather give a floor to some of the speakers who would tell you more about that. Well, let me share my experience with you. Since I have worked in the ICBC bank for a long time, I worked in Thailand in our office there. A couple of months ago, I came to Russia. I know that our corporation employs over 150,000 employees. We have over 400 offices abroad, and out of all those employees, I believe there are only 3 people speaking Russian fluently enough, including the staff hired on the ground. That is why, in terms of our human resources, we had to come up with a team of people speaking Russian. Maybe they may not be big experts in other things, and we realized that some time might be needed to develop such teams who would be professionals and who would be able to speak Russian, and that would be helpful in deepening relations between Russia and China. Russia has its own standards in terms of accounting and reporting, and it is not always in compliance with European standards, and in many ways it differs from other standards of other countries with whom I had to work before. I believe that not only my bank, but many other banks will require some time and some effort to master all these peculiarities. As of now, we don't know enough about the practices of markets and the business community as a whole. And as of now, it would be very difficult to implement joint projects. Yes, indeed, there are huge opportunities, but the question is how to translate them into concrete projects. And it is even more important to remove instability factors. We need to transform these uncertainty factors into the factors of certainty and predictability. It relates to the area of trade, to the area of investments, and many other sectors. That is why financial flows in the area of trade and investments are, of course, related to the mechanisms of risk management. And in this very environment, it would be difficult to speak about increased investment flows, and investors will be faced with lots of doubts. Yes, indeed, we do hope that debt will be issued in yuans at some point of time. But in addition to the very political decision, another mechanisms should be put in place. For example, the system of rating assessments. It is particularly true for the offshore yuan bonds. The same holds true of the Russian bonds, which are to be floated in China. We need to think whether it is possible to float these bonds in rubles. That might attract investment or reserve money that was generated as a result of trading and economic cooperation. The authorities should be very active in promoting such efforts. On the other hand, we need to extend bottlenecks with which we are faced on the way of the practical implementation of these projects. In particular, we need to develop common criteria, common market infrastructure, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much. Just a small remark. A very funny comment of one of our Chinese colleagues when he commented on the negotiations between Russia and China in relation to various economic projects. He said the following: your methods do not match our approaches to economic activity. And what he meant is that the Chinese economy is market-oriented. The Communist Party is only a name. It controls the ideological dimension, leaving freedom for the economic sector. And what we're trying to do is get access to the private economic environment of China with agreements reached behind the closed doors. Please confine yourself to 2 minutes. I don't want to argue right now, but I strongly oppose to what you have just said. Well, we've got infrastructure projects, we have large-scale agreements, but they are not numerous. The Russian and Chinese business communities, the Russian community was very active in China in the 90s, for example. And China developed technologies at the expense of our human resources who fled Russian suburbs and moved to China. The other thing was that they were export-oriented and they exported those goods to Russia. However, it did not result into joint ventures and partnerships. What I would say is market exists in both countries. Probably everyone knows that 30 or 40% of timber at the border areas of Russia comes to China through shadowy schemes. And the same happened actually in the Netherlands, and with the use of the technologies which are quite obsolete. We are still facing the task of bringing the timber industry from the shadow. That would be a big leverage for civilist business community. That is why I wouldn't compare those things. And answering the question that was asked, we don't have sufficient competitive products to be sold in China, with the exception of oil and gas. Right now, when our average salary is around $500, which is even lower than in China and Shanghai, we are becoming more competitive in many aspects, but many years are required to receive all the certificates and permits and to become well established in China. Lots of time is needed to get established at the Chinese market. We would not say that our trade volumes would increase threefold or fourfold, but still there is a capability for growth. Thank you very much. I believe it's high time to conclude our session. Although we are lagging behind the agenda, our discussions turn out to be very interesting and lively. Thank you very much.